Alright, hello and welcome everybody, and this will be my 7th episode of the weekly mailbag. And I had some decent questions this week, and hopefully they will be a little bit less controversial than last week's tactical pause, which was a huge fiasco. So the first question that I received that I thought was decent was about Vanguard. Hey Merlini, I've been thinking a lot about the Vanguard and where it fits into the current meta. I never see it in competitive play anymore, and the only time I see it in pub matches are on heroes that generally should not be buying it. I once saw a Disruptor rush it, or people purchase it way too late after it falls off. I once again saw Slaughter buy it at the 38-minute mark. I also just can't see myself ever needing to buy a full Vanguard, since I can pick up the early Vit booster for some early extra HP to turn into a Heart later, a Stout Shield to avoid harass, but skip the ROH for Trinkle Boots to cover my HP regen. Even in the games that I play where I pick a hero that I can see a Vanguard pickup, I usually skip it for Hood of Defiance if I need the HP regen and survivability, or an Armlet if I need to be as aggressive as possible. In the various Dota communities I go to, whenever the Vanguard is brought up, I mostly hear people just talk about how bad of an item it is, and how it needs a serious buff or rework to make it viable, such as being able to disassemble it. What's your opinion on the Vanguard? Do you think it needs a buff, or is it fine as it currently is? Okay, so I'm here to talk about Vanguard. It's around 2,200 to 2,300 gold, 250 for the Stout Shield, 1,100 for the Vit Booster, so that's 1,350 plus 875, putting in at, I guess, 2225 gold. Very close to a mechanism. I don't really know how to pronounce this, but I'm just going to say mechanism is close enough, which is also very similar cost, 2,300 gold, and it provides a lot of the same bonus damage mitigation in the form of armor as opposed to damage block, and HP regen, and also a HP heal as opposed to straight HP on Vanguard. So the build up on these two items, I guess they're about equal. They both have like some relatively cheap components. Nothing more expensive than 1,100 gold for the Vit Booster or 900 gold for the Mechanism recipe, and then they both require some cheaper components as well. But I think they're both about equally easily built up. But Mechanism is just a way better item than Vanguard, and this has to do with some of the mechanics behind damage block. So damage block actually happens before armor calculations. So this means that it actually doesn't really get better as the game goes on, except that your like HP goes up. So like you tank more damage usually, and like of your whole entire HP pool, you'll like block more damage just because you have more HP to block. But other than that, it doesn't actually scale that well. And this is one of the huge problems of Vanguard, and I think a lot of people are unaware about the mechanics of it. But if you actually tank creeps with it, or Ancients, let's say, I'll just go to Ancients real fast. Oops. Like Vanguard's pretty good for taking out creeps, but in terms of tanking hero damage, it's actually not that useful, because heroes at this stage in the game, level 9, level 8ish, when you'll actually be fighting a lot of heroes, they do a lot more damage than it will block, especially pre-mitigation, especially like a Gyrocopter or Drow Ranger, Clinks, any of these heroes with a lot of damage, you're just going to get destroyed by them. And like Vanguard is like it's kind of useful for tanking stuff like this, but notice like I can't even tank Ancients very well. And this is just one Ancient set, and I'm level 9 right now. I haven't skilled any of my sets, but I still take like a fair amount of damage, and these don't actually do that much damage, 74, 44, and 44. So I have a 70% chance to block most of the damage from these guys, and on ranged heroes, it's almost like unquestionable which one's better. Like if you're a ranged hero that needs to tank a lot of damage, for example Razor or Necrolite, I would almost never ever get a Vanguard over Mechanism. And the armor just scales a lot better. 5 armor is about maybe 15 to 20% damage mitigation, depending on where you are on your armor. It has a little bit of diminishing returns. If you have like 50 armor, 50 to 55, let's say, decreases a lot less damage than 0 to 5 armor. And on top of that, it gives you a lot of stats too. 5 to all attributes on top of a 250 HP heal. So instead of having like a flat HP gain and like the 6 HP regen a second. You get like a whopping 1 HP a second regen and a little bit more block chance and just more block. But again, damage block is not useful and it's highly overrated. The stout shield is really good early game just because heroes are really low damage and creeps are really low damage too. So that means the stout shield is going to do a lot because not that many things do a lot of damage like in the levels like 1 through 5 phase. But as you start tanking a lot more damage and heroes get their items and you start shifting away from tanking creeps and team fights revolve around towers and Roshan and away from these like 20 damage creeps, this Vanguard is not going to be very useful. And on top of that, Mechanism helps your team. And this is definitely the best feature about Mechanism, is that 250 HP heal times 5 is 1250 HP, and that's way more than Vanguard will offer your team. If your teammates get focused, Vanguard does absolutely nothing. Unless you can somehow take aggro, and Axe is one of the few heroes that can. But other than that, it's just not a good item. And I do agree that it does need a buff or a rework. I think it was a very cool concept when it was introduced because there was a lack of tanky items, but now there are some other HP items. You can just get a casual Vit booster if you want to rush a heart maybe on a different hero. You can get Rod of Atos even, which gives 325 HP, which is more than Vanguard actually. You get a few bonuses without even paying for a recipe, 5 intel and 75 health, and the slow, which is way more useful than this very minor chance to block and minor HP regen that you get from building a Vanguard. And it actually helps your team too because you can slow people for your teammates. It's obviously more expensive than Vanguard, but it is more useful. You can even just get straight bracers. That's pretty much 4 bracers. 4 bracers is 6 strength, 24 strength times 19 is a lot of HP. A lot more HP than Vanguard gives. Also, you can get a Hood of Defiance, which will help a lot, and the magic, the 30% spell resistance will get a lot more useful as you get more and more HP. Build HP items later, even Mechanism from one of your other teammates, or just bracers, or turn it into a pipe to help your team. But basically, any of these items are better choices than Vanguard, and I don't really know how to make this item better. I think it needs some sort of buff because the only time I've seen it gotten in competitive Dota is probably in the IG match where a Magnetar got it versus a Weaver plus some random other heroes. But other than that, I don't think I've ever seen it. Even on Darkseer and Axe and other heroes that tend to tank a lot of damage, I don't see the item gotten. And I think that's a problem when we don't see item variety. We always see teams in competitive play rush mech as opposed to, hey, I finished my Vanguard, let's push, guys. That never happens. It's like, hey, I finished my mech, and your team's like, oh, awesome, cool, let's push now. Or, you know, we can take team fights and win team fights, and getting a mech is a big turning point in a lot of competitive games, and that's when teams like start to clump up and group up and take a lot of team fights. But Vanguard doesn't change the tide of any fight, whereas Mechanism actually makes a huge impact. So either nerf Mechanism. I actually think the item's very strong and cost efficient, maybe not warranting a nerf, but compared to the other 2200, 2300 gold items, it's very useful. And again, Vanguard is just useless compared to the other items. And I don't exactly know how to change it, but I do think that there are problems with this item. And the second question that I received is about queuing. As you know, Dota allows players to matchmake in groups so that you can play with your friends. These groups often play with a higher level of coordination than solo queue players. The matchmaking algorithm attempts to compensate for this by pairing the group with solo queue players of overall higher skill. However, once you reach a certain matchmaking level, for example yours, it becomes impractical to find a group of higher skill players in a reasonable amount of time, if at all. If you check out the top 50 players on Dota Buff, you will find that most of them play in regular groups and have win rates over 70%, which means that someone in the skill bracket, most likely a solo queue, has to absorb 30% win rates. There was a Dota Metrics article written on this issue recently that can be found here. I actually read this article prior to this. His solution boils down to having a solo-only queue with all game modes except all pick, so as not to pull too much focus away from general matchmaking, but give solo players a more level playing field if they seek it. As a lower level player, this issue does not exist for me, as there is always a group of higher skill solo queuers to be found. So I was wondering that your opinion is on the matter as an ex-professional, very high-skilled player. Are you in favor of a solo-only queue or some other method of addressing this problem? Or would such a measure attempt to fix a problem that doesn't really exist? So this is actually a pretty good question, and a lot of people ask me, like, what should be done about matchmaking, because it is pretty good for, like, the middle of the bell curve. I assume the skills on a bell curve usually, and then once you get like past 2 or 3 standard deviations out, the matchmaking time gets really, really long. For those of you that have been watching my stream for a pretty long time, I've actually had over 20-minute search times before. I've even had a 30-minute search time where I didn't even find a game. So my teammates got like frustrated with the queue and they just left because we weren't finding a game. It wasn't like 5 a.m. in the morning. It was some normal time. The search range was all the way. We had like a couple of regions selected. We had all pick amongst other game modes selected. So it wasn't like we were searching within like a very tight game mode range and a region range. We were searching, I believe, EU West and US East during like a regular normal daytime hour. And again, 30-minute queue. And this was not the only time that has happened. And I understand that they do have, by they I mean Valve has some issues to work with when it comes to matchmaking, because how do they balance like queue time versus game quality? And I understand like at the end of the game there's like a, hey, you want to rate this match to see your enjoyment so they can improve their matchmaking algorithm, but there are some flaws. And I think it's supposed to be around 50% win rate for most people, but I'm going to pull up my profile, and I stack a lot, and I play with a lot of friends. Like most of the games I play with Frush, Mers, Swiss Beast, and this one was with Mers. But of like my last, so I think each page is 20 games. So I played 40 games in the last 8 or 9 days, and I've lost 4 games. And there's some sort of issue with this, and I'm not the best player, and I know there are definitely other players that are higher skilled than me, but I shouldn't be able to win 36 out of my last 40 games. And they did reduce the queue time. I believe it was in like the Timbersaw patch. They like expanded the search range for some of the very high skilled players so that we could find games more easily. And I do appreciate that, because that means I can, of like an hour of Dota, I can actually spend like 85% playing a game instead of like 50%, which is actually a pretty big deal. But the game quality of some of these games and the frustration level of some of the opponents that I face has suffered as a result. And I'm not exactly sure what the best solution to this is, and I thought that as more and more people play the game and as a player pool increased, then it would actually alleviate some of this issue. But you have players like this, I think there's like this guy who plays Wisp, Schmarn. He plays Wisp like all the time, and he stacks with some other very high skilled players, and I believe he has like a well over 80% win rate. And most people, if you're a normal person, you have probably around 50%. 50 to 52 is very, very standard, and anything above 55 is really good. That's actually the qualifications for the IXDL League, or one of them is that you have to have at least 55% win rate over 200 games played, and anything above 60% means you most likely queue with friends, because it's very hard to get that high of a win rate playing by yourself. And why do I queue with friends? Well, I queue with friends because it narrows the search range, because like oftentimes I'll like search and the search bar will fill all the way up, and then I'll either be stuck with subpar teammates or subpar opponents, and neither of those are very fun for me. So I'd rather play against people more similar to my skill level, and one way to make that happen is to invite my friends to play. And secondly, it's just more fun. Like who would prefer to solo queue as opposed to play with friends that you've met in the glorious game that is Dota? And again, I'm not really sure how to solve this, because there's always a balance in between 30-minute search times and like having a quality game. And I understand the frustration of other people too, and I know that they get frustrated, because there have been times where I just join the game and people just like straight up leave and just tank and abandon because they don't want to play, which is a little ridiculous. But at the same time, do they really I guess that they don't want to like waste their time and just sit in a game that they think they have a very high probability of losing, or it's just not fun for them. And I solo queued before and came up against stacks, and that's not very fun either. So I guess there was a solution boils down to having a solo only queue with all game modes except all pick, but give solo players a more level playing field if they seek it. I think a solo queuing different matchmaking would be a little bit useful, but again, that it would take away from the general matchmaking pool. And sometimes I do have like 5 to 10 minute queues, and I still get stuck with like absolute garbage games. And if I like refine my search range even tighter, which would be this like solo only queue with game modes except all pick, the pool that I would be matched against would be even lower, which means that the game might not be as good. Even if everyone is only solo queuing, that doesn't necessarily mean that it will be a better game, especially if I'm queuing at really late hours when the pool is really small to play against. And to solve this, some of the communities have even made their own in-house leagues. One of them in particular is IXDL. IX Mike made his own client, and you have to be vouched, and it uses a different client other than Valve's normal matchmaking system. And I play in this a decent amount just to get like a high level game and high level balance game. So you can like type .s to sign a game. It's a third party program, and the bot automatically makes teams similar to like Valve's matchmaking system. They try and make equal teams as possible, but the pool is very, very small. And the games, I guess 4 games, and average game time is maybe like 40 minutes to an hour, including the CM mode. So like 4 games per hour once every 15 minutes. That's about probably what I'm looking at for a normal matchmaking 2 with friends, because it takes quite a while for games to start, and I have to deal with random disconnects, people that abandon, and all this other stuff. And it's nice to have other alternatives, but again, this is not implemented by Valve, and I don't think they're gonna have some like really like exclusive in-house league so that high skill players have to go with other methods to try and get good matches. I don't know what the solution is, because I think that as the player pool increases, then the skill range in between games will go down a little bit, but it hasn't really happened in the past few months, and that's because probably Dota's still in closed beta. And I hope that this situation will alleviate itself over time, because as time goes on, the gap should decrease in between like average skill level and the really, really high skill players, and there should be more good players to begin with in the pool. So the more good players there are, the less discrepancy there is in between player skill within a certain game. And I think as of now, that's not really Valve's focus right now, because it's decent enough for the majority of the population that they don't really have to worry about it. But it is an issue at extreme ends of the bell curve, and I wish there was some like easy solution, but I don't think this solo only queue with all game modes except all pick is that great of a solution. I think the only good solution that I see right now is just having more players play and just having everyone get better, so that the discrepancy isn't so high. But that is it for me this week. The first question was on the Vanguard, and second was on like solo queuing versus stacks. And again, I don't really see a good solution to either of them. I wish I had good alternatives to each, but I do think there are issues with both the matchmaking system and Vanguard. And although I can't offer any solutions as of now, I do recognize that there are issues with both. And that's it for this week. Again, if you have any questions, just email me at mailbag@merlinidota.com. Again, I have to deal with the questions I get, and I'm trying to shy away from ridiculous ones like last week. I never want some drama fest to happen like that again. But feel free to send me questions, and I'll pick and choose through them, ones that I deem interesting and relevant. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will put this up on YouTube shortly.